Also known as composition, framing is how we fit a whole scene into the four sides of your screen. Now, think of this section as an introduction to how to hold your phone. We're gonna cover topics like how to hold your phone, where to stand in a room when you're taking a picture, and what to look out for before hitting the capture button. The lessons you learn in this part of the course are going to influence the way you take pictures for the rest of your life. For lesson 1, we're covering something very basic but very important to understand. Camera orientation is how to hold your camera correctly to capture a scene. And I see a lot of people just pull out their phone and go vertical like they're taking a selfie, and they take a picture of the room vertically. And unless they're doing a detail shot, it doesn't make any sense. So what's important to note here is you have to look at what you're trying to capture and fit your phone to kind of get that space in your screen. Generally speaking, that means landscape orientation. We're shooting large rooms, we're shooting whole exteriors. You're gonna want your phone in landscape orientation. So for all of these lessons, just know we're gonna be turned sideways. I'm gonna show you an example of the difference over here. So over here, we have a kitchen, and it looks a lot better when we're holding horizontally in this landscape orientation than if we're trying to capture it this way, right? You can see the difference immediately. This shows you a lot more, communicates what's happening in this kitchen. There's a second part that I just wanna let you guys know. When we're shooting landscape, it's easy to get your hand over the lens. Sometimes it's a finger that gets too excited. It just slides down. We gotta keep those things up. So make sure you're holding the edges of your phone, and then you have one finger free to capture that capture button on the right. But that's about it. Lesson 1, done. For lesson 2, right, we know which way to hold our camera. We're gonna do landscape orientation. But the next part is, I think, the most important part of architectural photography. It's finding a level camera. And this makes more sense. Level cameras make more sense when you have a tripod and it's a big, huge camera. When you have a phone, leveling you have to do entirely with your eyes. And I'm gonna show you how to do that here. Coming back to the kitchen, we have our phone in landscape orientation. We have the whole kitchen in the shot, but this isn't an architectural image, okay? We're kind of pointed down. The sides of the scene look a little bit crooked. You can see it doesn't look like a straight room, right? We wanna make a really nice, solid looking straight room. And the way to do that is to make sure your camera is level. So the first step to getting a level camera is finding a midpoint, a vertical line kind of in the middle of your image to use as a reference. Right now we're gonna use this pendant light right here. It's in the middle of our image. It's pretty close. If that weren't there, we could use maybe the cabinets over the microwave back here, but this one's closer. So we're gonna use that pendant light and rotate our phone left and right until that pendant light is perfectly vertical. Okay, you can see it's vertical now. Now, you can see that the left and right sides of the scene are very tilted. You can see the curtains on the left are kind of bowing outwards almost. In the cabinets, you can see more of the bottom of the cabinets than the top of the cabinets on the right side. So, to fix that, we have to tilt our phone. We're gonna tilt the bottom of our phone towards the scene. Okay, and when we do that, everything straightens out really quickly. Look at those curtains on the left, look at the cabinets on the right. This isn't a perfect shot yet, but our phone is now level with the scene. So it was 2 steps, really quick. First step, rotate your phone left and right until that midpoint center line is completely centered with your scene, and then tilt your phone forward and back until everything straightens up. Now, you'll notice if you like to hold your phone really high and you do this, you're not really showing the ground. And this is a problem a lot of people run into, and it's a really important problem we're going to cover in the next lesson. So for lesson 3, we're gonna discuss something called camera height. And it sounds very obvious, but it's the most overlooked aspect of photography, especially composition, that I think there is. It has the most impact on what your final image will look like. So we're gonna show you exactly what that looks like right now in camera. Remember I mentioned most people take pictures eye height because it's comfortable, right? When you're taking pictures of like a kitchen, you're gonna put your camera right where your eyes are normally and then point down like you would look down. But that doesn't work well for us. So using what we've learned, we're gonna level our camera, okay? We're gonna level it, and then because we're still high, we're not seeing what we wanna see. The next step is applying camera height. So we're gonna move this camera just vertically down, not changing the orientation of my phone at all, just sliding it down like it's sliding down an elevator. And you can see when I get lower, we can see more of the ground, we can see much more of the stools, It's not full of ceiling anymore. And the kitchen looks a lot nicer. This looks like more like a picture you would see online. Okay, and that was just a function of changing the camera height. See, here's up high, here's down low. So once you level that camera and you bring this down, those two things together become really powerful tools for you to remember. And I think when you pair them together, you start getting really clean images. So we've been stuck on this kitchen for a second. I'm going to turn over to the living room right behind me and show you what it looks like in a different setting, because camera height is a function of the room. We're going to be at this specific height for the kitchen because the countertops are about this height. If we didn't have countertops and these were just sofas, we'd actually come even a little bit lower. So I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. And here we are in the living room. I didn't move my feet at all. I just kind of swung my camera around. But we're at the same height we were in the kitchen. And I'm not seeing everything I want to see. Like the table looks cut off. I have a lot of ceiling. It's not quite right. So still keeping my camera level, okay, forward and back, rotationally, we're kind of locked in. I'm going to drop it even lower. And now I'm probably about belt level. And this is starting to look more like what you'd see online or what you'd see in like a magazine. This camera height really focuses your attention on the furniture and the layout of the space. Okay, and that's only because this is a lower set room. All of the furniture in this room is a lot lower than in the kitchen where you have these really high countertops. So again, here's our kind of kitchen height. And then down here in the living room height, we're gonna match our camera orientation to the couches and everything else in here. So for lesson 4, we're gonna figure out where to actually stand in space, where to stand in the room to get that really pretty shot. We know how to hold the camera correctly now, but now we need to know where to put it. And the simplest, most straightforward trick I can teach you is called the 1-point perspective. And the 1-point perspective is also referred to as the straight-on shot. Okay, and you achieve this look by finding a strong leading line, or you find a strong central focal point in a room, and then you straighten up your camera on it and make sure it's kind of flat with the opposing wall. So there's a couple opportunities for it in this space. I'm going to show you what a normal shot would look like over here and explain the benefits to you as we go. So this is like what most people would probably do to try to capture this space. To make this more interesting, you can actually move over here and actually simplify the scene by lining up all your subjects on one plane. Right now everything is compressed into one plane, and you kind of simplify how the room is perceived. So just centered up on this dining table, you can see there's less going on and it's a little easier on the eyes. There's another opportunity for a 1-point perspective or a straight on over here. Okay, see how we're kind of flush with that back wall. Okay, we're going to center up on that pendant light again. Make sure our camera's straight. And center the camera, and now we're flush with the wall, and there's our 1-point perspective. You can see it lined up right. Oop, there we go. Right here's our center line. We'll do it again over here. We're going to center up on this dining table. Right there. Here's our center line. Get it flush with that back wall. And that's our 1-point perspective. Now these shots aren't meant for every single room. Okay, if we wanted to do this way with the dining table, it wouldn't work nearly as well. Like you could do it, but there's not enough room to make this impactful. If you were in a space where everything wasn't laid out perfectly well, it wouldn't look right. So just know that this is a trick to pull out when it works, but it doesn't work in every single room. So moving on, let's find something that does work in every single room, the 2-point perspective. So for lesson 5, we're going to go over the 2-point perspective. We just covered the 1-point perspective where you center on something in the scene and make sure your camera, your phone is flush with the back wall. This is kind of the opposite. The 2-point perspective is when you have 2 vanishing points, or basically you're shooting from the corner of a room. And this is the easiest way to figure out a space. The 1-point perspectives really aren't available all the time, but 2-point perspectives are available everywhere. And as long as you know that you're doing it, I think you become more aware of what you're including in your shots and why. So we're categorizing it this way just so you kind of have a rule to fall back on and know you're doing something right. So the trick here is just to shoot from the corners. I'll show you. So we can do a 2-point perspective over here in this corner of the living room. Okay, we're in this far corner. I'm going to come over here now. And now if we come from this corner, we did this one earlier, I'm sure you're familiar. We could come down here, make sure we're level, lower the camera down. We have another 2-point perspective. We could flip around this way. Corner of the dining room area. Get our camera at the right height. Notice our table in the foreground. We don't want to be too high up here. Here's a 2-point perspective. We could come up and do the kitchen again. We know that area very well, so I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go into the kitchen this time. Okay, so this is kind of from the back corner of the kitchen. We have this nice countertop in the foreground, kind of leading us in. We're in the corner. There's another perspective. But just knowing to shoot from the corners of the rooms will give you a ton of ideas for composition and kind of where to stand. You can see we're just moving from corner to corner. We can go to this corner and get that one, right? So this isn't rocket science. It's just knowing which corners to stand in and which ones are going to look best for what you're trying to achieve. With that in mind, we're going to go into some more advanced conversations about some interesting places to stand that always tend to work out for taking pictures. So let's jump into that now. So for lesson 6, I want to talk about where to stand when you take pictures. Now this is a question I get all the time and people just don't know where to start. And knowing how to center up on something or knowing to stand in a corner is a good rule to work from. But my advice to everyone, even my own photographers, is when you're walking into a room, kind of when you hit that point where a lot opens up, that's a good place to start from. So we have this main hallway here. If I'm walking in and there's this point where I start to see the living room over here and I see the dining room here and I see the kitchen here, there's some opportunities for me to start taking pictures in this area. So I'm going to start this way, and you can see right at the entryway of this room, we have this nice shot of the dining table, the living, and the banister for the stairs, all kind of in the same shot. And that's really nice, right? And this is just in a doorway. And we can do the same thing over in the kitchen, which you've seen many times before, but similar idea, like in the doorway or in the walkway or wherever your main pathways through the room are where you want to stand. And that's just a great starting point. It doesn't mean you have to stay there, but use that as a reference point if you get stuck. So I'm gonna go to this pathway to the kitchen, right? And right as you're exiting the kitchen, you have this really nice foreground area. You can see the dining area here. You can see the living room here, all in the same shot. And this is just where you would stand if you were leaving the kitchen. Doing the same idea over here, we're gonna come in the office. This is your first shot, is right when you come in, this is what you see. The same thing would work on the opposite side of the room. You'll see that this is a much nicer shot than the other side, but you wouldn't know unless you just went to this doorway. Okay, so for lesson 7, we need to talk about focal length. And this is like the zooming feature on everyone's phone. It's super powerful, but it's overused. And there's an old saying that photographers tell each other is zoom with your feet. And when you zoom with your feet, you have a lot more control over perspective in the scene, right? So if I were to try to take a picture of this living room here, and I can't get everything in the frame, most people resort to actually hitting the zoom dial on their phone and just trying to zoom out and capture it. The problem with that is it distorts things in the foreground. It distorts things close to the camera. My hand is not this big, but if I zoom in, okay, back to my normal focal length, and I just take a few steps backwards, I'm zooming with my feet, okay, I can start to fit everything in a little bit better. And this zooming with your feet idea is something I hope you use forever, because what it does is actually, it creates a more normal perspective, a more normal view of the room. This is what you actually see with your eyes versus, I'll take a picture, versus that last shot we did where we had the same stuff in the frame, but look how different it looks. So I want you to zoom with your feet before you zoom with your lens, because you're going to get something much more impactful. And this is why you often find photographers doing stuff like this where they're arched over something or they're crouched weird in a corner. It's because they're trying to get as far back as possible from the scene to get the most accurate perspective they can. So before you do the zoom, on your phone, zoom with your feet. Now, not to say you shouldn't zoom on your phone, because if anything, if you can find a way to get even farther back and then start to zoom in, you get something that looks a lot more like it came out of an interior design magazine than it did your phone. So now that we know how to zoom with our feet, and we know not to zoom immediately with the camera, a lot of things start to open up. And what happens is things start to come into your scene and you don't know whether or not to include them. So instead of telling you exactly what to do, I'm gonna give you a couple rules I use to make sure that it's still clean and the picture I'm creating is doing what I need it to for our audience. So for the living room, I'm gonna step up and show you. So we're gonna do just the normal view of the living room like we've been doing, okay? Good camera height, we're level. I pulled back a little bit, I can see everything I wanna see. But now the question is, do I wanna show the living room by itself and show this kind of clean open area? Or do I wanna pull back and start to include the dining table? Okay, like what is my intent with this photo? Do I wanna show people the dining room is right next to the living room? Or would I rather do this and have really clean edges of the frame? Now this is up to you and kind of who you're showing. If you want to show room by room, I suggest isolating the rooms like this and just making sure that the edges of your frame are pretty clean, right? Like we're not cutting off just an edge of a chair here and confusing anyone. We're gonna have just the window frame at the edge of our frame over here, and we have the lamp and the picture over here. Now notice how I'm leaving a lot of room for that picture to know that it's a picture. I'm not just having this black bar. The frame of that picture isn't there. It's actually a piece of the picture. So when you're choosing the edges of your frame, this part gets pretty advanced and takes a lot of trial and error, but you want to make sure you're showing just enough to insinuate, to kind of let the viewer know that there's something there, but you're not showing so much that it becomes distracting like this and that you're cutting off important things over here. So it's kind of a dance. You have to figure out where you're going to stand, where you're going to zoom, what's going to be on the edge of the frame, what's going to be in the foreground. The only thing you can do is take a few options of each and then decide later. All right, so before we wrap up the lesson on framing, I want to make sure that we apply everything we learned inside to the exterior of a home as well, because this is the most important part of the house you're going to show potential buyers or people on your team. So let's jump into how to apply the rules of like making distance and keeping the camera level and making sure we have the right focal length and standing in the right spot. We're going to do all of that outside right now, so let's get into it. Before we photograph the exterior of the home, we have to make sure we're standing in the right place. I see most people pull out their phone while they're standing in front of the house and they try to point up to fit it all in the frame. Sometimes they'll even go as far as adjusting the zoom on the camera to fit the whole house in. And that's just not what the house actually looks like. The thing I want to show you is creating distance. We talked about this inside. I want you to actually look behind you and step way back. Okay, the further back you get, the more accurate the home becomes. And then you move around and you move with your feet to find the correct framing of the home. Okay, so now the home is kind of small in the middle of the frame, but it looks right. It looks perspective correct. So from here, we're gonna zoom in. I'm just gonna pinch and zoom and fill up my camera frame with the house. And then we're gonna lift the camera up, kind of like we did inside, because this is a very tall feature. And then I'm gonna make sure everything's level. So I'm gonna make sure left and right is level. I'm gonna tilt forward and back and make sure my verticals are aligned with the edges. And I'm gonna go from there. Let's go ahead and take that picture. Now, the last house looked really nice. Everything was well prepared. All the landscaping looked great. There wasn't a lot of trash in the front yard, but that's not always the case for new construction. Most of the time, you see pallets in the street, you see some trash, you see some debris, maybe some landscaping isn't fully grown in yet. And oftentimes, those get in the way of a good shot. So for this house, I wanna show you how we're gonna deal with that. So I'm gonna stand right in front of the house like we did before, kind of from the sidewalk. This is where most people would start. Okay, and looking up, you can see I can't really fit the whole house in frame. I can zoom out if I need to, but then we're distorting. So again, we're gonna take a step back, kind of following all the rules we've learned so far, keeping the camera level, kind of raising the camera up in the air, taking a step back, and you can see we have this tree that's in front of the house. We have this pallet on the ground, and even though the house looks pretty good in the frame from here, we have all these distractions going on. So if we kind of step to a side and not shoot straight on, you can see those get even worse. Okay, that tree's now in front of the front door. You can't really see where you enter the house over here. Now we have a fire hydrant. So instead, we're gonna go the other way. And you can see through my screen that just moving around, you can kind of find a more clean shot, right? There's less distractions, there's less trash literally in the way. And then from here, we're gonna zoom in a little bit. And this angle helps show the depth of the house. You can see down the left side, we can see how deep this house is. It isn't a small house at all. Cool, and I think once we kind of get locked in here, we're leveling the camera, lifting it up a little bit. This looks like the best shot of the front of the home. Okay, so that's the end of the framing portion of this course. I hope you learned a couple tricks that you can apply to all your interior and exterior photos. So to continue our lessons, we're gonna go inside and talk about different lighting conditions and how light can affect your photos.